Hello everyone, Simon here. Welcome to the architecture of Cyberpunk 2077. So, in this video series, I'm gonna look at the architecture of Cyberpunk 2077. This is Night City. If you don't know anything about the game, this is pretty much where the game starts. It's a big game, it's a big city, and there's gonna be a lot of stuff to look at. But we'll start off with some first impressions. And we're going to introduce some of the key themes, or the core themes, of the architecture in this game, just in the first, however long this is. So, imagine you don't know anything about this game, right? Or in fact, if you don't know anything about any city, and you just like arrive at a city and you don't know anything about it, you can read a lot from just looking at the architecture. You can read a lot about the society, about the economy, and we'll try to do some of that in the game here. So where are we now? We are in front of Megabuilding 10. That's the entrance there. 10. So this is where the game starts. When you play the game, you have an introductory sequence, which is the backstory of your character. And then the first time you get the freedom to do whatever you like is at this point when you leave the mega building and you step out the front gates, and then you're just in the city, right? You're in Night City. So this is where Night City really begins. Let me step forward just a little bit across the road. Alright. We come out from underneath this overhang here and we get a bit of a little bit of sky there, and we start to see stuff beyond, right? Maybe I want to step over here, maybe?
Fucking joke. Did in a copter, dude.
No, I want to go back. Alright, wait. Sorry about this. Let me go back. Let's stand here. Alright, let's just look around. So just looking at the city, like this, there are things we can observe, right? The first thing you might notice is that this city is dense. It's dense, and there's a lot of stuff going on, right? It's very tightly packed. Compared to a real-world city that you might be familiar with, this is a lot denser. So why? Like, what is dense about it? So there's a few things. First of all, this layering. If you look through here, there's always like stuff behind other stuff. Whereas in a real city, usually you have buildings and then the sky, right? There's not usually a lot of bridging structures, although sometimes there are. And it's not just that. If you look down here, there's stairs down, and there's another road underneath here, right? So Night City is built in layers, or there's usually a lot of different layers in any part of the city. And this obviously adds to the density and the complexity of the city, right? It's quite three-dimensional, and so when you first come into the city, you can get confused, you can get lost very easily, because like you think you're where you're supposed to be, but actually you're supposed to be above or below. In real cities, this often doesn't happen unless you're in a really big city, and even then, it's like a large population city that's geographically constrained. Like Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong, by the way. So Hong Kong is geographically constrained by mountains, and so there's not very much land, and so then there's a lot of layering up. Like a big city, even like London, you don't see a lot of like stacking of streets, stacking of buildings. But there's a lot of stacking here, is what I'm trying to say. Alright, so the next thing is, if you just look at these buildings, you will notice that these things are very close together. If you look at that, like there's a building there, there's a building there. The buildings here are much closer together than they would be in the real world. And the streets are narrower too, right? I don't know if you can tell. Maybe just like looking at it, maybe if you're not familiar with looking at cities, you can't really tell. In a real city, often there'll be more space between buildings, and the streets would be wider, and the buildings would not be over the streets as much. So it's, it's layered, it's packed tightly together, and then there's the bridging structures. You can see that there, right? There's a lot of bridging structures, like this building, it goes up in a little column and it overhangs the street below. and then that thing there, brainwash, behind there, right, there's like a bridge between the two towers on either side of the road, and then that building there, the diagonal stuff, it leans over the road, and so everything in the game here, like it's all leaning over and on top and bridging across. This doesn't happen in real life very often. In the real world, there's property rights. Which, I mean, so property rights, if you own a piece of land, only you are allowed to build permanent structures on the land and over the land. And so you can't have somebody else build their building on top of your building. It doesn't, like, and streets as well. The streets, the property rights for the street belongs to the city. It's to the city government, right? So the city owns the street, you own the piece of land, and it just goes straight up. Everything straight up within the boundaries of your property belongs to you. Planes can fly overhead, but you can't have permanent structures overhead. So that's property laws in the real world. Here, though, it looks like we don't care about that. Because here, we have a lot of stuff on top of other stuff. I do want to go across here now. So over there, like you see that? There's a building there. There's two buildings in fact. There's that one, and then that one, and then that one. And on top of those, there's that thing across it. And it's also across the road. There's a road down here. So this thing bridges over the road and it bridges over other buildings. So something is going on with the property rights in Night City that is very different from the property rights in the real world. Unless they gave permission. I mean, you can give somebody else permission to build something on top of your building. But why would you do that? Usually you don't do that. So the overhanging and the bridging, again, it creates just more stuff, like it's more layers and more density, more so than you would expect in the real world. Now I want to say that you can't do this in the real world. Like technically speaking, structurally speaking, you can build structures like this, no problem. It's mostly the legal issue, the legal problem of property rights that prevents you from doing this in the real world. Right. And then there's the monumentality, by which I mean some of these buildings are enormous. If we look at the building we came out of, it's called a Megabuilding. Megabuilding 10 is a giant block. So it's a really big block, straddling over other buildings. So it's not just, you know, densely packed, but it's also a huge thing that's densely packed. So that adds to the sense of just density of the city, right? So you take all the buildings in a real city and you just kind of crunch them together into a smaller space, and you end up with something like Night City here. Right, so that's it, that's density. Another major theme in Night City is chaos. Things are chaotic in the city, or it's made to feel chaotic, right? It's not just that there's a lot of stuff put together, but all these pieces, they don't really want to fit together, or they fit together in complex ways, in convoluted and complex ways, right? So if you look at the layered roads down here, well, I mean, these roads are kind of crazy already. Like there's one that goes down that way, and then it goes that way, and then it goes that way, and that way, and that way. So there's already like a big intersection with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different exits from this intersection here. And then we go down, and then that road goes that way, and that goes that way, and that goes that way. So there's 3 more directions down here, and they're different from the directions above, kind of. Well, I guess they kind of line up a little bit. So everything's pointing in different directions, and so you have like layers that are going different ways. So you have like they're not lined up. The layers are not lined up neatly. They're like rotated against each other, right? So the road grid, there's multiple road grids and they're rotated differently. And that just makes things a lot more confusing. And they're doing it deliberately, right? They're trying to create a city with a sense of chaos, with a sense of like disorderliness, or like it's so complex that you can't understand it. It's confusing, is what they're trying to do, right? And then if you look at the buildings, again, there's a lot of different pieces, and they're all fitting together, like through each other, on top of each other. Like there's that thing going that way, and then there's that thing going the other way, and then there's this thing sitting over here. And so all these different shapes just overlap on top of each other, all in different directions. I mean, you can imagine if there's a lot of shapes, but they're all lined up, then it's a lot more easy to understand, right? But that's not what they do here. Everything is in different directions, so it's harder to understand. So it feels like the city is more chaotic. And this makes the city really quite incomprehensible when you first arrive. I guess when you spend enough time, you can figure it out, but it's deliberately incomprehensible, right? There's a lot of evidence that this chaotic nature of the city is a result from bad city planning. And when I say bad city planning, I mean the game design. I don't want to like imply that I'm saying it's a bad game. It's not. It's that the game designers deliberately made a city that looks like it's had bad city planning, because that's part of the story. The story is that the city is badly planned, right? So it's intentional. So it's like it's bad, but intentionally. The story is that the city is bad, and so the intention of the storyteller is well done in that sense, right? So when I say something is, oh, this is bad design, I wanted to just clarify whether it's, because it's supposed to be bad design for the story's perspective. So the lack of city planning, that's supposed to be how the story is told, right? And we can say that because one example, you have roads on top of roads, right? Usually, when you have a road, you just have a road. When you design a city, you leave a certain amount of space for the roads, and then you build the buildings above. And then, at some point later in time, you find out, oh, we need more roads because there's too many people. Like you start building skyscrapers, and you realize there's not enough roads to carry all the people that travel to and from the skyscrapers. So you need more road, but there's no more space, and so then you layer up the roads. You have like another road on top of the existing road to double the car traffic going through without having to make the road wider, because you can't make the road wider. And so, but this is like, it's bad planning because you didn't foresee that you need that much traffic capacity. You see what I mean? Like if you planned ahead, then you would know. In the real world, I spent a few years living in Melbourne, and Melbourne is a little bit famous for planning ahead. So Melbourne, the city center, the roads are really wide. Really, really wide. And in the very center of the city, it's about the right size, and there's very little congestion. I mean, there's some congestion, but not that bad compared to other cities, right? But the thing about Melbourne is when you go outside of the city center a little bit, the streets are still wide, and they're really too wide out there because there's not that many people, but the streets are really, really wide. But what happened there is, instead of not leaving enough space for future roads, the original planners just left a lot of space. Left too much space. And in a lot of ways, having too much space is better than having not enough space, right? Because if the street's too wide, it's fine. If you don't have enough streets, then you have traffic jams, right? So you don't really have traffic jams in Melbourne that much because they left way too much space for the roads, so the roads are wide enough. So that's like, but that's unusual actually. It's unusual for people to do that. Usually people don't think ahead enough, and so then the streets are too narrow. Anyway, that's a little bit of an aside. But it does, I guess the point is that if you look at, the streets versus how many people are on them and how much traffic's on them, you can see that, what they were thinking when they planned the city versus what actually happened, right? So you can kind of see that interaction or that relationship. And yeah, so the confusing road layout and the fact that there's two layers, it shows that they put an intersection here, but the intersection was too slow for the traffic, so they put in a bypass, so the road underneath it bypasses the intersection. So if you don't want to use this intersection, then you just bypass it, so to create more capacity for traffic, and it's just a huge mess. It's just a huge mess. And that's the result of like incrementally increasing the capacity of the road. Like you need more roads, you build more roads, and then you realize, well, no, we still need more roads, you build more roads. And when you add incrementally to anything, it becomes very messy very quickly, right? Okay, so then we also have inhospitality, inhospitality. Okay, that's right. Wrong button. So Night City is a lot of ways inhospitable. It's kind of hostile to people, hostile to pedestrians. And the backstory of Night City and the backstory of Cyberpunk is that this is a hyper-capitalist dystopia, right? This is a science fictional future where big corporations control the economy and poor people struggle. And so when you look around, there are clues. Well, there's not much rubbish around here. Oh, well, there's some rubbish. Oh, there's dead people, look at that. There's dead people there, and then there's homeless people here, right? And then there's rubbish lying around. So there's not enough provision of housing and services to the people because the corporations, want to cut taxes. The whole capitalism thing. So there's no money for rubbish collection. There's no money for homeless people, but there is money for like enormous towers. We look beyond there, like big neon signs, tall towers, and then like big shining corporate towers out in the distance. You can see that back there and back there. So there's money, just not for you, right? There's money in the city, just not for common people. And as we go through the game, you see this really emphasized, this contradiction, right, between the rich and the poor, and the extreme difference in the quality of life between those two groups. In fact, if we look up, how well can we see it from down here? If you look up, you'll see that like up there, things look much better up there than down here. I mean, graffiti. So like, the higher up it is, the better it looks. And then the lower down it is, the uglier it is, right? So the corporations, the corpos, they're up there, and then the common people are down here. So the dominance of corporations might actually explain this property rights thing. Remember how I said that we don't, in the real world, we don't often have buildings on top of other buildings because there's property rights, and then property laws that prevent you from building on top of other buildings. But in this world, if we imagine a world where you have fewer rights and fewer legal protections, and instead, whoever can afford things just does things, then imagine if like your property rights don't limit other people building on top of you. Then, a big corporation comes in and they build a big building over you. But it's always going to be a big corporation doing that because it's a big, tall building, and only the rich people can afford big, tall buildings, right? Like your poor neighbor is not going to build their house over your house because they don't have the money to build such a big structure. It's only the rich people who can have enough money to build the big structure, right? And so when you have lax property rights and property laws, then whoever has the most money can take advantage of that situation. Like, you can say, well, anybody can build on top of anybody else, but yeah, how am I going to build on top of that? I need to build a tower all the way up to be taller than that one, and then build on top of him. But I don't have that much money. So, this sort of lawlessness and lack of legal protections favors the rich more than it favors the poor, and it contributes towards the economic inequality that we see in the game, and how the rich can exploit the poor a lot more than in the real world inside this game. Alright, so those are basically the core themes of Cyberpunk 2077, and as we walk through the city, we'll see how these things are expressed in different parts of the city, right? We have density, we have chaos, and we have hypercapitalism. I want to emphasize that, you know, in the real world, we don't really see anything this crazy. Because people don't want things this crazy, right? People don't actually want to live in really dense cities because it's crowded and noisy and it smells bad. And it's just like difficult to live in a crowded city. It affects you psychologically. People go crazy if they don't have enough peace and quiet. And so when you're like in a big city, people get stressed, like psychologically stressed. So people don't like that. People don't like chaos, like people don't like to be lost and confused. It's unpleasant to feel those things, and so people want a sense of safety and security and legibility and comprehensibility. We don't want to be able to understand what's going on around us. And most people also don't like hypercapitalism. I know there are some ideologues who think that capitalism is great, but most people don't think that. And most people don't want to be extreme capitalists. Like, I mean, okay, some capitalism is useful, but let's not get too crazy. So this is not the kind of world that real people want to live in for real. And so we don't build cities like this, or we try to avoid building cities like this. Like, we try to avoid having our cities become this dense and this crazy, because like if we can avoid it, we want to avoid it because we don't like this. So that's why we don't see this in the real world, because we just don't want to. We want to be safe and comfortable and in control and not live in this. And so Cyberpunk, it's a video game, and it is a fantasy, right? This is like an escapist fantasy that offers us a different kind of world to explore. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that throughout the series, I'm going to say a lot that this is unrealistic. I want to say that a lot because it is unrealistic. But when I say it's unrealistic, I don't want to mean that as a criticism, because this is fiction, so it's not supposed to be realistic. What I'm saying is, by comparing how the fantasy is different from reality, we learn more about fantasy and we also learn more about reality, right? It's like a comparative analysis that allows us to learn more about both. And that's what I want to do here, really, is the comparative analysis between what we see in game and what we expect to see in the real world. Right? Alright, so I spent enough time just standing around here. Let's go for a little bit of a walk. We're gonna walk down to the river and then turn around and then cross the river. And we just take a quick look around, not take anything, not look too deeply at anything. Just get a first impression of the city. Alright, let's get out of here. As we come through, let me just look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at the layering. Look at the bridges behind like that thing, by the way, is a freeway. So there's a road up there as well behind. So there's this monorail and a road, and then beyond that more buildings. So again, the layering of the infrastructure and the buildings. And then the pedestrian bridge over here, of course. And as we said, rubbish not being collected. Yeah, there's a big rubbish problem in the game. So in the real world, just now, if you're paying attention to the news... Actually, when I'm going to upload this? This might be uploaded in a few months. So this might not be current events by the time you watch this. But as I'm recording this, at the moment, a number of cities in the UK have budget problems and money problems, and they're trying to cut the wages of the rubbish collection people, and the rubbish collection people are on strike, and then the rubbish is not being collected, and it's a disaster. It really is a disaster. In the game, you don't smell the rubbish, so it's okay. In the real world, if the rubbish starts piling up, it's a big problem. It's a huge problem. It smells, and rats, and everything else. Like this is not. It's very quick. There's like the city very quickly becomes not livable if you stop collecting rubbish. If the water stops, if the food stops, if the sewage stops, and if the rubbish collection stops, if any of these things happen, the city very quickly becomes uninhabitable. And in fact, if we go on a bit of a tangent, a little bit ramble a bit. So Rome, right? The Roman Empire, ancient Rome. When the Roman Empire existed, Rome was one of the biggest cities in the world. It had about 1 million people living in one city, one of the biggest cities in the world at the time. They imported food from North Africa. They had big aqueduct systems bringing water in, and they also had big sewage systems to take the sewage out. And so all that stuff required a lot of maintenance and a lot of people to fix everything, to make sure everything's working right. And when the Roman Empire, when Rome was sacked, they stopped maintaining that stuff. And very quickly, the city of Rome became unlivable. And the population of Rome crashed from 1 million people down to 10,000 people at the lowest point. 1 in 100 people left. It crashed from 1 million people down to 10,000 people. Because if there's no water, you can't live there. If there's no food, you can't live there. If the sewage starts backing up, you can't live there. Right? And so when this happens, the city stops functioning very quickly. Like, things get really bad really quickly if that happens. So I'm not sure how realistic this is. I know they're doing this just to make Night City more dystopian. But if you think about it, realistically, like, once that starts happening, Night City might completely fall apart and fail completely. Like, it's amazing how fast things can fail when your infrastructure fails. So I think our game designers here are being a little bit optimistic about how the city can survive if the infrastructure is neglected. Anyway, that's a bit of a rant. Alright, I'm gonna move this way. I'm gonna have to cross the road as well. Let me just try not to get run over. Oh, look at all that. Yeah, like, see how the building leans over the road? That basically blocks more of the sky, right? It makes everything seems tighter and more oppressive, just because there's less sky available to you. Oh, by the way, if you go to cities like New York is a famous one. Buildings in New York, they lean back, they don't lean forward, because the planning laws in New York requires buildings to lean back to allow more sunlight to reach the street, right? So the street down here. So in order for more sunlight to reach the street, by law, the buildings have to lean back. So again, like, legal restrictions that make the city not this oppressive. So in the real world, we don't do this, just because, like, we don't want to live in a dystopia. Like, we don't actually want to live in a dystopia, and so we make laws to avoid things getting this bad, right? But anyway, in the game, they really lean into the leaning in, because they want to emphasize just how crazy this city is. So as we move forward, again, we have layers, right? Layering. We have pedestrians above and cars below. Some of this is kind of curious. I don't want to get too distracted by the details. Not yet. Alright, so there's a pedestrian area up here, separated from the cars below. Probably better for safety. Up there we have an N-card station. N-card is the Night City something rapid transit. Night City area rapid transit. So there's a monorail system that goes through the city. You'll see these tracks quite often. Oh, about these tracks, you see how they're like above the road and in the road space and above the road. Usually that means it's added to the city after the city was planned. So like a well-planned city, Melbourne again. In Melbourne, they left so much space that there's enough room on the ground for trams. On the trams aren't even actually on the street. Like there's the carriageway for the cars, and then there's space for the trams. Like, it's wide. The roads in Melbourne are really wide. So they left enough space for trams and cars separately. So here they obviously haven't. They haven't left enough space just for the cars. And so then additionally they put monorails up. And so because there's not enough space horizontally, they have to stack things up vertically, right? which makes things a lot more intense. Anyway, so again, like the idea of planning and having enough space. And I just want to, like, I keep talking about Melbourne, but I just want to explain, like, the difference between planning ahead and leaving enough space versus not planning enough ahead and not leaving enough space. And what it looks like, and how you end up with different cities because of good planning or bad planning. The A-card station's up there. Alright. Oh, there's a station down here as well. Not sure how that joins up there, but video games. There should be shops here, but this one seems to be closed. Oh, there's a food store there. Not as much economic activity as you might expect, given the amount of people. Alright, so as we get closer to the river, we get out from underneath the buildings, and we can see, so the river's down there, and across the river, that's the city center, and oh my god, look at that. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Alright, let me look at my notes. So, this thing, what can we say about it? First of all, it's black. Black buildings are uncommon in the real world. They do exist, but like dark colored buildings are not common. Just because it's a little bit menacing, it's not that friendly. You'll be surprised how many buildings are pastel colored, but maybe if you don't pay attention. Actually, a lot of buildings in the real world are pastel colored, just because it's nice and family friendly and pleasant. And as I said, people want to live in friendly cities. We don't want to live in dystopias. So if you cover the building, cover the city in black buildings, then it looks more like a dystopia, because it looks like a black iron fortress or something, right? And again, the density of it, see how the towers are touching? It's kind of crazy if you think about it. But the buildings are so close together, it forms a solid wall. And so it looks like a giant fortress, and you're not part of it. Because that's the point, right? The whole point of the city center is, the city center is the center of corporation power, right? So the big money, big power is over there, and it's basically a fortress for them. And anybody who's not a corpo does not belong there. So that's what that is. Yeah, it's actually not... There are a lot of issues with building that close, like... So buildings, they're not... They move. You might not notice them moving, but if you live on the top of a tall building, you know that when the wind blows, the building moves a bit. Because like, nothing is that rigid, right? So if you have a tall enough building, and it gets windy, it flexes a little bit. And when you have multiple buildings that are too close together, and if they flex, they'll start smashing into each other. At the very top, they'll just like touch each other and they'll break all the glass. And so buildings really should not be that high up. And that's just the wind. Imagine what happens when there's an earthquake. Like if there's an earthquake and you have like a tower with nothing on either side, the building will shake and it might hold together. You hope it holds together if you're inside. But if it's a light earthquake, it will hold together and you'll be fine, mostly. But again, if the buildings are too close together and they start shaking, they're gonna smash into each other and then you're not fine. And then there's a lot of broken glass and people are sad. So buildings are not as rigid as you might imagine. They do flex a bit. And when they do, you don't want to be too close to the next guy. So that's really like, there's no way that's gonna work in the real world. That's so unsafe. And it's, so there's wind, there's earthquake, there's also thermal expansion. When things heat up, they expand a little bit, and when things cool down, they shrink a little bit, and you might think that's not a big problem. But when you have a tall enough building, then that all adds up. Like if it's a steel building and it heats up in the summer, it's gonna stretch a little bit, and when it cools down, and if you have an individual tower, it stretches and it shrinks a few inches, you don't really notice. But when you have multiple buildings and if they join together, like in a big slab like that, imagine if all of these are joined together, if they're bolted together, if they start expanding and contracting at different rates, it'll crack. Like it'll break and it'll crack because it's all joined together. And so having your buildings separate from each other, you know, like it avoids the problem of, you know, wind, earthquake, thermal expansion, or the foundations too. Man, there's a whole lot of reasons why this is a bad idea. Your foundations are also not solid, by the way. The ground, you think the ground is solid, it's not. When you put a heavy enough weight on it, like a giant skyscraper, you can sink into the ground a little bit. And you hope you don't, but sometimes you do. And so if you have a big building, and if it starts sinking at different rates, again it's gonna crack and break. If one end of your giant slab is sinking faster than the other, then it's gonna crack, right? Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why it's a bad idea to have all these buildings stuck together like this. But of course, none of that matters in a video game, right? We don't have physics in a video game. So all these real-world physics problems about how to keep your building intact, we don't have to worry about any of that in a video game. And so here is just a big solid mass of corporate towers. And it's completely solid. It's just all touching each other because that's the highest possible density. And the game designers, the environment designers just wanted to make it maximum density. And everything's just stuck together. I guess if I didn't say all of that, you would think you would just look at it and think it's kind of cool, right? It's kind of crazy. But now that I told you why it wouldn't work in the real world, it's a little silly. Maybe I ruined this for you, my bad. Okay, let me get down from here. Sometimes when you know too much, it ruins the art. It ruins the feel of it. If you know too much about engineering. Alright, look at that. We got bridges across the river. Let me try and get across here without being run over. I get run over a lot in this game. Oh, there's the cars. Okay. So as we get out from under the buildings and towards the river, it opens up. The weather's nice, so it's not so bad. Down here we have the river, and we have bridges across the river. Pretty cool, right? A little bit reminiscent of New York, I guess. New York also has rivers. You know, Manhattan Island, and there's bridges across the river onto the island. So a lot of bridges because there's a lot of traffic. Up there we have a bridging structure leading from the city center over to this side. There's a tower here. We're gonna see more of this later on, and usually it's the corpos, right? The corpos will build building structures, build bridging structures over the river and over other buildings. Mostly so they don't have to walk on the ground. They don't have to walk among the commoners. They can just float across the river high above, like the gods they are, or something. I don't know. All right, we're gonna go that way. That's Japantown, by the way. We will walk through all these districts and look at everything in closer detail in future videos. Japantown is more colorful than the city center, but it's about the same density. Look at that. It's just as dense but less black, more colorful. So it looks less oppressive, at least on the outside. There are secrets and hidden things on the inside that suggest otherwise though, but we'll get to that later. Coming around here, we see more of these overhang structures, cantilevered structures, leaning over the roads. Spoilers, RCS is a transport company, and in fact, can we see some transports? Let me get on this bridge here. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So we're heading over to Japantown. Let me run a little bit. And the bridge across to Japantown. Let me just make sure we understand what the river looks like. Right, there's highways by the river. The river is there. More rubbish and homelessness down there. Now, as we come over this bridge, you will notice that there's no provision for pedestrians on this bridge. And in fact, most of the districts, most of the bridges do not accommodate pedestrians. So I said earlier how the city is kind of hostile towards pedestrians and hostile towards poor people, right? So in the real world, sometimes you would deliberately not provide public transit and not provide pedestrian access to certain areas to keep out the poor people. Like rich people sometimes do that. Rich people sometimes would deliberately not build like subway stations or bus stations so that poor people can't get near where they live. It doesn't happen that often, it's a bit obnoxious, but sometimes it does happen. And here in the game, like there's no pedestrian walkway across to Japantown, right? The idea is if you don't own a car, you're not welcome. If you don't own a car, don't come here, right? And as I said, like sometimes it happens in the real world, not that much, because it's so obnoxious. But this is a dystopian version of reality, and so, you know, just think of all the most awful things that people do to each other. That's Cyberpunk, right? And so like, what is the most awful way people can treat each other with bridges is you just don't provide any pedestrian access to anyone. And so poor people can't move around. Alright, we're gonna come down this way. Oh, so this bridge has a roof on it, and there's really no reason for the roof except it looks cooler. This game does that sometimes. They just put things in because it looks cool. Like, why is there a roof there? This doesn't serve any purpose. I mean, you've been on highway bridges. None of them have roofs. That doesn't do anything, but it looks awesome, and that's the only reason. And that's fine. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just pointing it out. Sometimes this game does things because it looks cool and for no other reason. Alright, getting towards Japantown. There's another mega building there. So as we walk around the city, you'll see that there are mega buildings scattered around the city. We'll talk more about that much later. But just keep that in mind, that there's the mega building, this pattern, we'll see a lot throughout the city. There's all the buildings in Japantown. Let me get off the road, not get run over. Okay, and Japantown, we have some vaguely Japanese style. We'll look at that stuff closer in the future. Looking back, there's the city center, and it looks very different, doesn't it? Look, it's like a solid black block of towers over the city center. A much more colorful block here in Japantown, although it's still kind of solid. And then where we came from, which was Little China, so that mega building there, the blue and yellow one, that's the one we came out of, number 10. And there's fewer skyscrapers over there, right? So it's taller here, lower there. So you can see how the city center is there, and as you get out from the city center, the scale of the buildings gets smaller and smaller. You can't really see it in that direction, can you? Over there, there's an industrial district. So we go from the commercial center through Little China and Kabuki and then out to the industrial district. We'll talk more about this later on. But that's basically this part of the city. We have 3 districts we can see, and they each have their own characters. Alright, I guess that's it for our first look at Night City. So again, the core concepts. We have density, we have chaos, and we have hypercapitalism, right? And it's very density. Just looking around, you can see how everything's packed close together. And you have a lot of layering and a lot of different shapes put together, like it's very complex. Look at that. A lot of different shapes jammed together. And hypercapitalism, you can see the shiny corporate towers there, and the corporate towers there. Alright. So, looking ahead, in the next video, I want to spend one video doing a broad comparison between the Night City in Cyberpunk 2077 versus real-world architecture and real-world cities. To understand how Night City fits into the context of real-world architecture history and theory, right? You know, because like none of these ideas came from nowhere, right? All of these ideas are borrowed from the real world and then in a lot of places turned up to 11 to create Night City into this like exaggerated version of urbanism. And to understand where these ideas came from, we need to look at real world history to understand the context of it, right? So after that architecture theory video, we'll go walk around the whole city. The city is divided into a number of districts. Let me just get into the map and zoom out so we can look at it. So this is the city. Zoom out. Oh, too far. So we were here, Little China, we were there. And we walked down here, and then we crossed the bridge and we got to here. So we walked this far. And this is the size of the whole city, right? It's that big. So the districts have names. So this is like, oh, it's behind my face. Crap. Hold on. My bad. Should I move my face? Let me think about this. Maybe it's better up here. Okay. So on the map, in the bottom right corner there, we have Little China, we have Kabuki, we have Japantown, we have North Side, Arasaka Waterfront, and then the city center, Corpo Plaza, downtown. So there's all these districts, and we're gonna walk through all of them. We're gonna spend one video on each district, although some of these videos might be kind of long, because some of these districts are big, right? And we'll walk through the whole city, and we will look through not everything, because like it's so big and so complex. We're not gonna see everything, but I'll try to cover most of it. I'm going to cover the general idea of each district. After that, we're gonna look at the mega buildings specifically, because I think that's kind of interesting. And then we're gonna look at our apartments. So V, the character you play is called V, and V has a number of apartments around the building. We'll go look at the apartments to see the interiors of the buildings as well. And that's going to be the whole tour, right? So most of it is going to be walking around the districts and just having a look. Yeah, I'll try to cover the whole city in a general sense, but we're not going to look at every single thing because there's too many things. Oh, there's also a lot of areas in the game that are tied to certain quests, and then outside of the quest you can't actually go into the buildings anymore. So those places we won't be able to see. Like the interior of the Arasaka Tower, like if you've played the game before. The interior of the Arasaka Tower, for example, we can't see. Inside the airport or the spaceport, we can't see. So things like that, if you've played the game before, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it just means that not every space in the game is accessible to us. Alright, so that's it for this first look, and a brief introduction to the core themes of the architecture of Night City. I will see you in the next video where we compare Night City with the real world in a broad and general way. Alright, see you next time.